Hello, my name is Abby Driscoll, as Mrs. Upham said, and it is such a privilege to be here, and I'm completely humbled to be able to share my research and my ideas on this topic with you today. And my topic, as Mrs. Upham said, is on the compatibility of minimalism with the Christian faith. So I started getting into this idea of intentionality, specifically with possessions, several years ago, and it's just continued to evolve into different areas of my life, into spiritual and mental areas as well. And as of this fall, I'll actually be living out of a single backpack for 9 months, and Lord willing, be traveling the world as part of the World Race Gap Year. But even before those plans came about, I already personally had experienced the physical benefits of minimalism. And so when it became time to choose a topic for senior thesis, I really wanted to dive deeper into the psychology and sort of theology behind this movement and see if there was really something else to it. And when approaching this, I knew that I had seen the term in several great conversation books. So I tracked a few of those down and decided to dive deeper into Henry David Thoreau, A.W. Tozier, and the Journal of Cultural Economy, as well as Psychological Science, among other sources. And it really is amazing that once you are invested in a topic, you start to see it pop up everywhere. And I'm already so humbled by how much more I still have to learn on this topic, and hope that it will spur you on too and see it pop up everywhere. And with that, today I want to talk to you about a shirt. It's a shirt you probably all have. It's the shirt that when you wake up, you go into your closet or your dresser and you take it out, you look at it, maybe hold it up with the pants you're wearing or even try it on, but it doesn't quite go. It's just not a good fit for today. So you fold it back up, if it's a good day, put it back in the drawer, maybe cover it with some other clothes so you don't have to deal with it for a little while. And it's disappointing because it's a really nice shirt. You spent good money on it. So maybe it'll get worn one day. Several years ago, I was going through this routine, but instead of putting the shirt away, I held it up and I said, "Not today," and I gave it away. What had changed? I realized that I had been buying stuff simply for the sake of buying stuff, and that I really only utilized about half of my wardrobe. And this minimalist mindset spread like a virus to other areas of my life, to my unhealthy stuffed animal collection, to my bizarre number of Sharpies, and to that stock of books that I have never and frankly will never read. I realized that I bought a lot of stuff, and holding up that shirt made something apparent that I had been thinking about for a while. My stuff was not only cluttering my space, but my mind and my soul as well, in a way that prevented me from living a fluid and content life. Our world finds itself in an environment simultaneously overflowing with material goods and rapidly running out of resources, overflowing with availability and rapidly running out of happiness. This basic problem originates in the idea of consumerism. While consumerism alone is just the act of purchasing something, it becomes a problem when it morphs into unethical consumerism or materialism. This materialism comes from the obsession with resource consumption in an unecological fashion. This materialist thought pattern is part of human nature and can be found in the ancient Egyptians burying their possessions with the dead, in the famous Roman roads allowing for more commerce and consumption, in Christopher Columbus's infamous quest seeking an easier trade route, and even in Henry Ford's transportation paving the way for all. Yet these moments in history are seen as economically or theologically necessary rather than as negatives. The pessimistic views of consumerism really didn't come about until after the rise of the Industrial Revolution, along with the rise of supply and demand. This revolution just further confirmed man's ability to equate material goods with happiness and success. Through this rising materialist culture, we condition ourselves to believe that convenience, luxury, and excess should be treasured more than personal or environmental well-being. And with the rise of consumerism came the question of whether or not an alternative exists. In the attempt to aid in the reversal of these materialistic trends, the minimalist movement also began to rise. Minimalism is the intentional act of keeping both intangible and tangible factors of life to that which is sufficient, an amount everyone must define for themselves. And while the exact origins of this movement can't be pinpointed, they pop up throughout all of history. Thinkers and philosophers such as Pythagoras, Epicurus, and even Plato accredit simplicity with beauty and happiness. Not only that, but Christianity, amongst other religions, contributes to this idea about fleeing from possessions in order to obtain a greater spirituality. Although this idea of simplistic living really dates as far back as the dinosaurs, and it's commonly tied to art, philosophy, music, and architecture, the actual term minimalism truly gained its popularity when materialism also began to rise. So from ancient aesthetics all the way to hipster coffee shops with white walls and simple succulents, minimalism is popping up more than ever. But more than an aesthetic, it presents itself as a tool that can assist in freeing people from the chains of a materialistic mindset. And as a result of all of this, we find ourselves in this ever-rising consumerist mindset while also being pursued by the modern minimalist movement. And as with any progressive movement, people will naturally, and I think rightfully, question the usefulness and morality behind it. Minimalism is no exception to this, but brings those, especially under the Christian umbrella, to wrestle with both minimalistic and materialistic trends. When properly applied as a tool, the minimalist movement leads away from detrimental consumerism, promotes a life with more margin, and contributes to a life more like Christ. And as a result, it should be examined and used by Christians. Consumerism threatens both environmental and personal health, thus straying from Christian ideals. Today, people go about their life thinking that the world possesses a bottomless supply of resources made for him to squander. Yet, in reality, that person's very daily decisions can negatively impact a very limited source of materials. In the Journal of Cultural Economy, Dr. Miriam Meissner explains that the irreversible downside to accumulation manifests in environmental pollution and the depletion of natural resources. In other words, this accumulation or consumption cannot increase exponentially without major environmental impacts. The way in which we produce and expend daily materials not only adds to the devastation of the atmosphere, but exhausts those natural resources. However, as terrible as this is, at first glance, we might be willing to brush off environmental issues for the sake of having the trendiest pair of shoes. Yet, on closer inspection, these materialist mindsets do more than simply deplete the earth. They actually play into decreased levels of well-being. Dr. Monica Bauer of Northwestern University conducted an experiment involving some undergrad students, and she used different materialistic cues to observe their reaction to them. She writes that there's evidence that indicates that materialistic individuals experience relatively lower levels of well-being, have higher levels of selfishness and aggression, and also experience higher rates of anxiety. Compare this with Genesis 1:26, where God commands us to have good dominion over the earth, and Romans 12:2, where we are told to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. In contrast, materialist trends stray from good dominion and pose a threat to the minds of men. These environmental and mental issues are not merely factual problems, but they go against biblical decrees. Although individuals consume resources and seek to maximize their happiness, the actual result of such behavior depletes the earth's resources and depletes their own personal well-being, thus straying from the Word of God. Time and time again, we discovered that the pursuit of less actually leads to a more fulfilled life with greater margins. As we've already established, many problems obviously exist with the materialist mindset, so we must recognize the need to take action towards a more intentional and different lifestyle. In his well-known book, Walden, essayist Henry David Thoreau instructs, "Do not seek so anxiously to be developed, to subject yourselves to many influences. Superfluous wealth can buy superfluities only. Money is not required to buy the necessary of the soul." Consumerism commonly but mistakenly equates itself with economic growth as well as social and personal growth. Yet in this passage, Thoreau gets at a simple truth in life. A fulfilled life does not directly correspond to a life full of possessions. All these superfluous things materialism tells us we need act only as a stuffing paper in the gift of life. They may seem attractive, but they serve no actual purpose in the long run. The essential in life is not in the development of wealth or the search for abundant possessions, but as Thoreau says, in the wealth of thought and the abundance of the soul. Researcher Dr. Samuel Alexander of Melbourne, Australia, elaborates on this even more in his collaborative book called Degrowth. He says that voluntary simplicity involves embracing a minimally sufficient material standard of living in exchange for more time and freedom to pursue other life goals. Adding to Thoreau's attempt to make man realize that the necessities of the soul can't be purchased, Degrowth gives more specifics on how time and possessions operate in this sort of trade. That is, in the pursuit of living with less, people can actually exchange these materialist mindsets for more margin and freedom in their life. This margin, as a result of condensing to the necessary, allows for greater fulfillment in the things that truly matter in life. And we're seeing this take action right now with the coronavirus, canceling many or most things that would normally fill our schedules. And it's in this challenging time that we have the opportunity to see this extra margin in our life and to use it to do honorable and good things. Even though this form of minimizing has been sort of forced upon people, minimalism in general, of both materials and schedules, when approached correctly, proves itself to be an adversary to this ever-rising detrimental consumerist mindset. In addition to this pursuit of improved environmental and personal health, minimalism is actually in agreement with the life and teachings of Christ. Hints of the underlying sin of materialistic greed and the solution of minimalism sprinkle themselves all throughout Christ's ministry. In Luke 12:15, Jesus states, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has abundance does his life consist of his possessions." Not only did Christ live in a minimalistic way, but he also directed Christians towards that mindset as well. As Mr. Bradley mentioned earlier, Jesus warns, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Christ's whole backing for this notion of being unabsorbed with material goods stems directly from the fact that materials on earth will perish and prove no real value in eternity. Another biblical example of this tension between materialism and minimalism comes in the story of the rich young ruler, who has apparently kept all the commandments and asks Jesus what he must do to possess eternal life. Jesus simply instructs that he goes and sells all he possesses and gives to the poor. An easy task, right? But the man walks away sad because he has so many possessions. Repeatedly, Jesus proves that man's love of material goods, not necessarily their quantity, but their love, hinders him from experiencing God fully. In other words, the problem of materialism stems from the fall of man and truly impedes the pilgrim's walk to the celestial city. A.W. Tozer articulates this further when he says that there is within the human heart a tough, fibrous root of fallen life, whose nature is to possess, always possess. The pronouns my and mine look innocent in print, but they are verbal symptoms of our deep disease. God's gifts now take the place of God, and the whole course of nature is upset by the monstrous substitution. So in seeking to find himself within things, we lose sight of the maker of all things. Further, as the founder of Adventures in Missions, an organization that encourages young individuals to live with less in order to pursue Christ, author Seth Barnes also articulates Christ's teaching of abandonment of possessions. He says that although Christ's packing list for his disciples certainly left a lot to be desired, he says you'll find that your real needs are actually a lot smaller and different than you thought. Christ wished that his followers would learn not to rely on materials and the security that possessions give them, but to tune into their spiritual needs and what truly matters in life. Minimalism certainly doesn't replace salvation, but it serves as a tool to prioritize one's loves and reduce the roadblock of greed on the trek towards a more Christ-like life. Now, those cautious of the slightest modern movement say that minimalism promotes idolatry and serves no real purpose in the long run. Individuals such as this point at verses like Isaiah 44:9 that say, "All who make idols are nothing, and the things they treasure are worthless." So in this interpretation, well-meaning individuals argue that minimalism stands as an idol to worship rather than a movement away from idolatry. They argue that in the pursuit of less, man actually comes to worship the object of less. And naturally from that train of thought, it could be said that minimalism poses just as many, if not more, negatives than positives, and thus should be avoided altogether. And while I think caution towards modern notions should be commended and idolatry obviously avoided, to conclude that minimalism is the heart of the problem fails to diagnose the actual issue. This verse says nothing about the amount of idols, just the presence of them. Those opposed to minimalism are right in saying that this verse doesn't condone getting rid of possessions, but neither does it argue for keeping them. This passage simply states a fact on man's view of his materials. It is right to say that minimalism doesn't necessarily sidestep or automatically heal the issues of the heart. Take a man who owns one red Ferrari and idolizes it just as much as another man who owns 20 cars. It is true that people can live under the title of minimalist and be just as infatuated with materials as excessive consumerists. Yet the use or misuse of any movement stems not from the movement itself, but from the heart of the individual behind that movement. In other words, when man's heart and mind are set on the right goal, minimalism is not a stumbling block, but a catalyst towards Christ and one encouraged by Christ, rather than a source for idolatry. Not only that, but minimalism that ironically promotes idolatry isn't minimalism at all. The true minimalist movement is meant to serve as a tool, just as a diet or checklist. The end goal is not the thing itself, but the mental and physical result of utilizing that tool. In proper employment, We can utilize the positives of minimalism to serve as a compass to steer from obsession with materials towards a more conscious way of life. Another common misconception about minimalism is that it just reshapes consumerism and thus ineffectively avoids the vice of materialism. Dr. Meissner presents the rising notion that narratives of lifestyle minimalism are paradoxical in that they resist and yet at the same time promote capitalist cultures of growth. In other words, in the attempt to buy and possess fewer belongings, those that claim to be minimalist might end up promoting different, probably more costly companies. And it is true that there exists a middle to upper class subculture of minimalism that chooses to invest in only a few of the highest quality sustainable items. Yet these sustainable items are produced and created from materials proving less harm to the earth, sourced from places where workers are treated ethically as well. In supporting sustainable companies, these cultures obviously still fall subject to consumerism. However, they participate in ethical, minimal consumption, not only in the pursuit to own less, but in a pursuit to build more moral and relationship-oriented partnerships with the companies they're buying from. We live in a modern world where avoiding consumerism or the purchasing of goods altogether is practically impossible. So rather than seeing consumerism and minimalism as this black and white issue, the two can be combined to sort of form a sustainable ethical growth. So rather than impractically demanding that we all cease to partake in consumption altogether, as a Christian community, we need to seek to support and join those taking strides toward more sustainable living. Rather than falling into unintentionally promoting inconsistent idolatry or advocating unethical consumerism, we should seize the opportunity that minimalism presents to walk more consistently with Christ and obey the call to support that which actually helps our society. So, while this rather lengthy speech is certainly not minimal in itself, perhaps the fog over this modern movement has begun to fade just a bit. If Christians are genuinely willing to use this movement as a way to steer from unethical consumerism, then the natural byproduct is a more sustainable, more fulfilled, and more Christ-like life. Eliminating the unnecessary in different areas of life allows for more time and space for that which truly matters. This world constantly bombards our mind and tries to convince us that more is more. Yet in reality, the simple truth of less is more holds true. Whether it is the ever-decreasing state of the environment, the increasing bustle of life, or simply the shirt in the drawer that never gets worn. The disciplined pursuit of less presents itself as a treatment to aid in healing this void within mankind. For the sake of the environment, for personal well-being, and for an enriched pursuit in Christ, we should utilize this tool by simply stepping into a more intentional way of life. Thank you.